Alright, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to take some Cornell notes on some literacy genres. So make sure you are taking Cornell notes along with this video. So, what is a literacy genre? A genre is a particular style or type of writing. So a genre is a style of writing. A literacy genre is a style, or is a genre is kind of the category. Literacy means it's about writing. So it's a category of writing. Here are some common genres. There are fiction genres like folk tales and fantasy and historical fiction and realistic fiction. There is non-fiction, which is like biographies and autobiographies and informational texts. We're going to go into more detail into all of these different types in just a second. So let's start with fiction. Fiction is writing that tells about imaginary people and events. These are stories that are made up. They are not real. Sometimes they do use some real elements, but there are stories that are made up. They are not realistic. Well, we'll go back to that. So, the first type of fiction is fantasy. In this type of story, the author has created a magical world where anything is possible. It may include magical beings, it may include talking animals, other things that are impossible. These are fantastical. Fantasy. Things that involve magic, things that involve things like dragons, magic, magical creatures, creatures that talk. All of these things are fantasy. Historical fiction, in contrast, are stories with fictional characters in a historical setting. You know how I was saying before that sometimes they are based in real things? So this story takes the reader back to a particular time period where they learn about everyday life of a person. The character may interact with actual historical characters, but usually the main character is not based on a real person. Or even if it is based on a real person, it has information that you wouldn't necessarily know about that person. So, this is fiction that takes place in a historical setting. Science fiction are stories based on real or imagined inventions. Space travel or life in other worlds, usually set in the future. It often explores the unknown. Our dystopian fiction fits under science fiction. I don't know why that's doing that. So, things about spaceships and aliens and robots and dystopian fiction all are part of science fiction. So, usually futuristic fiction. Horror and mystery fiction. Those two are usually put together because there's a lot of overlap. Horror is a fiction where events evoke a feeling of fright in both the characters and the readers. Here are two examples of horror fiction. So it horrifies you, it's scary. Mystery is a fiction dealing with the solution of a crime or the unraveling of secrets. So here are some examples of mystery writing. Sometimes mystery and horror kind of go together, and they're often placed together in places like libraries because the mystery is horrific, or there's a mystery behind the horror. So those two kind of tie together. Our next is realistic fiction. These are stories that could actually happen in real life. The setting is realistic, the characters speak and act like real people, they're real-life problems, they're usually modern day. It seems like this could be written by somebody who lives today in today's universe. So it's like historical fiction, except it's modern day. So some examples are below. So this is real-life fiction, realistic, but not real people. All right, now these two are very closely related. Fable and folktale. So the fable definition is over here and the folktale definition is over here. So make sure you're not copying them separately. Fable is a short story, usually involving animal characters. So fable involves animals that teaches a lesson about what is important in life. Aesop's fables is a good example. A folktale is a story told generation by generation, usually of word of mouth. There are sometimes different versions in different cultures. We don't know who originally wrote it. Sometimes it involves animals and witches and magic. So both of these are somewhat fantasy related, but they're more about animals and less about magic. So, but sometimes there's trickery or things like the number 3 that are symbolic. So that's fable, which is animals, folktale, which is word of mouth, things that go down generation to generation. Myths and legends are also similar. Myths are early people's way of explaining the universe. Before science told them how things worked, myths told them how things work. Many involve gods and goddesses. They're usually superhuman in nature. Think about Greek mythology and all those things that those gods and goddesses do. But those gods and goddesses are also very human. They have human emotion. There's often magic involved. Gods also sometimes appear disguised as human beings. So these are myths, mythology. Also kind of fantasy, but not quite the kind of magic that we see in fantasy novels. Some fantasy books play very heavily in myth. All right, a legend is a story handed down from the past that people tell as a true story, but the details are difficult to confirm. It's usually you hear a lot of, oh, well, I heard this from my friend who saw this, and that's what a legend is. They often contain a moral or lesson, and they uphold the values of a community. They often involve supernatural or religious elements. So the legend of Sleepy Hollow is kind of a horror, but it's also a legend. So it's not quite true, but there's that little bit of maybe it is because I heard it from someone who claimed that it was true. Urban legends fit under this category too. All right, next are tall tales and fairy tales. These are another thing that ties very closely to fantasy. A tall tale involves an extraordinary person, so that's better at things than an ordinary person. Exaggeration, so this person's even bigger or greater than it should be. And an explanation, it explains how it came to be. So that's a tall tale. Paul Bunyan is a good example. A fairy tale is a tale that usually involves fairies or magic or in something enchanted. The setting is often a forest or a castle. These are the once upon a times and long, long ago. There's a good character and there's an evil character. There's a problem that needs to be solved. And the good people live happily ever after. So these are both also something that ties very closely into fantasy. But they're a little bit different than what a fantasy is. So tall tale are the extraordinary, exaggeration, explanation. Fairy tales are once upon a time, happily ever after. All right, so now we're into nonfiction. These are accounts of real people, places, and events. It is fact. It is not fiction. That's why it's called nonfiction. So, first kind of nonfiction are biographies. It's a true story about a person's life or the parts of her life, but it's written in a third person because it's written by someone else. Lincoln didn't write this biography. Lord Channerwood did. Melissa Mueller wrote this biography on Anne Frank. So there's an author and then there's a subject. But the subject is a real person. It's fact. An autobiography are books that's like, see, biography is right in there. So it's still a book about somebody's life, but it's by themselves. That auto means you do it by yourself. So Bill Clinton wrote this book about himself. Lauren Ingalls wrote this book about herself. Maya Angelou wrote this book about herself. So it's in first person, I, me, my. Sometimes they might have an editor, as you see over here, because the famous person might not really be good at writing, so someone else might edit theirs, but it's written by them about them. The rest of nonfiction kind of falls under informational writing. These are textbooks and how-to books. It gives you information about a subject. So there's usually facts about a variety of subjects. It could be like historical books or kind of more reference books or even like the how-to, those dummy books. Anything that gives you information. Now, there are two other kinds of writing that aren't quite fiction or nonfiction. Sometimes, depending on how they're written, they might fit under both. So that's why these are separate categories. And the first is poetry. They are lines of poetry written in stanzas. So it's not paragraph and chapter and paragraph and paragraph. It's all in verses. Some of those verses might have rhyme or rhythm. They also use selected words and phrases to create vivid pictures. So the words are very selective. There's not a lot of words in poetry, but it's a very kind of simple, but very big words and very descriptive words, so that you really get the image, even if they're not describing it for paragraphs and paragraphs. All right, the last type is drama and plays. They are meant to be presented to an audience. So you can read them. They're a type of writing and they're a type of reading, but they're meant to be presented to an audience. They're meant to be acted out. They have a cast of characters. Sometimes they have a narrator who gives you important information. Instead of chapters, it's broken up into acts and scenes. It has props that are described in it that tell you what you need to use to support the action. The dialogue is what the author said, or the actors say when it's presented, and stage directions tell the actors what to do, like raise your hand or throw something at someone. So these are the actions, these are the dialogue. There's also sections that might describe the scene or describe the background image. All right, so that is all of our literacy genres. Make sure you can rewatch this video if you need more information. Make sure that your notes are complete, as there will be a quiz on this next class.